Every empire has a bill attached to it, and the bill never shows up in the brochure. People see the tower and assume it rose out of luck, timing, or some rare gift handed out at birth. That is the story the world prefers, because it is comfortable. It lets everyone else off the hook. The real story is uglier. Somewhere behind every fortune sits a man who traded his sleep, his friendships, and his peace. For a result nobody could guarantee him in advance. He did not want balance. He wanted the outcome, and he understood that outcomes are purchased, not wished for. While the rest of the world argued about work-life harmony, he sat alone in a room with the lights off, working through a problem that refused to break. He gave up the ordinary comforts on purpose, not because he hated comfort, but because he wanted something the ordinary life could never buy him. This is not a story about talent. Talent is cheap and common. This is a story about a man who found out exactly what greatness costs and paid it in full, in the dark, without asking for a receipt. Call him the architect. This is his invoice. Society sells the same script to almost everyone, and most people buy it without reading the fine print. Go to school, get the grades. Find the safe job with the steady paycheck and the decent benefits. Clock in at 9, clock out at 5, and spend the hours between answering messages that will not matter to a single soul by Friday. Go home. Heat something up. Watch a screen until the eyes go heavy. Sleep. Wake up and run it back. For 40 years straight, until the body is too tired and the joints too stiff to enjoy whatever is left over at the end. They call this stability. They call it the responsible path. Nobody warns the 18-year-old signing up for it that stability and slow decay often wear the exact same coat. Look closely at the people living inside that script, and the cracks show fast. They are worn down by Wednesday. They count the days to Friday the way a prisoner marks a wall. Every morning, the same lane of the same highway, brake lights stretching out to the horizon, eyes locked on a stranger's bumper for 25 straight minutes. A voice on the radio cracks a joke nobody laughs at. The engine idles. Exhaust hangs in the cold morning air. Nothing moves. This is not one rough morning. This is the average Tuesday, looped for decades, and most people never once stop to ask why they agreed to it. The architect looks at this life and feels something closer to nausea than envy. He does not see the weekend the way everyone else does. He does not see 2 days of rest tacked on to the end of 5 days of obligation. He sees 48 hours where the rest of the market has gone quiet, where the field has finally cleared out enough to move without anyone watching. Consider how the average person spends a Friday night. The laptop shuts at 5, the tie comes off, and by 7 there is a crowd at bar spending money they do not have to numb. A week they hated. Someone orders one more round to keep the feeling going a little longer. The music plays loud enough that nobody has to think. Saturday starts late, somewhere around noon, with a headache and a phone full of blurry photos nobody remembers taking. The couch swallows most of the day. Something forgettable plays on the television. Around 4 in the afternoon, a wave of guilt rolls through and gets smothered by a nap. Sunday arrives with a low, quiet dread that builds hour by hour, a small knot in the stomach that tightens every time the clock ticks forward, until by 9 at night, the knot has a name: Monday. 48 hours, gone, not spent, burned. Multiply that across 52 weeks and the arithmetic turns brutal fast. Months of a single year, handed over for nothing but a headache and a story that gets forgotten by Tuesday afternoon. The architect spends his Friday night in a different room entirely, and there is nothing glamorous about it. Picture a small desk under one lamp, a laptop fan humming in the quiet, a cup of coffee gone cold an hour ago, a thin skin forming on the surface that nobody bothers to skim off. The only sound in the apartment is the clatter of a keyboard and the occasional click of a mouse. Outside, the city keeps its own noise going. Bass thumping from a passing car, a siren 2 streets over, laughter spilling out from a bar on the corner. None of it reaches him. His eyes are locked on a spreadsheet that will not balance, a formula throwing the same error for the 4th time, a plan with more red ink in it than black. His neck has gone stiff. His eyes sting from the screen. He rubs them once, drinks the cold coffee anyway, and goes back to the formula. He does not do this because suffering feels good to him. He does it because he ran the numbers on the other option, and the other option frightens him more than any spreadsheet ever could. He has watched men 20 years further down the normal road, sitting in a cubicle with a photo of a family they barely see anymore, waiting on a retirement date that keeps sliding further out. He has heard the same sentence come out of a dozen different mouths in a dozen different voices. He wishes he had done something different back when he still had the energy to try it. The architect made his decision early. He would rather be exhausted chasing something that belonged to him than comfortable serving out someone else's 40-year plan. This is the part nobody wants to hear because it strips away the excuse. It is not about being smarter than the man still stuck in traffic. It is not about a lucky break he was handed that somebody else was not. It comes down to how a person chooses to spend the 2 days a week that everyone else treats as a reward for surviving the other 5. The architect does not believe in the reward. He believes in the compounding. Every wasted Friday is a Friday the competition gained ground. Every lazy Sunday is a Sunday closer to the same regret whispered by the men in the cubicles. Nobody can live at this pace forever, and he does not pretend to. But in the season when the foundation is still being poured, he treats the weekend like it is built from the same hours as a Tuesday, because it is. There are no breaks in that season of a life, not really. There are only days that move the mission forward and days that let it drift backward. The normal life sells comfort now in exchange for regret later, and it sells it well, wrapped in vacation photos and long weekends and a pension plan that may or may not still exist by the time anyone gets to use it. The architect looked at the price tag once, decided it was more expensive than it looked, and walked past the display without buying. There is a version of the trap that looks like progress and is not. A promotion arrives, the office gets bigger, the title changes on the business card, and for a moment it feels like winning. But the hours stretch longer instead of shorter. The leash simply moves further out, and it becomes clear that climbing someone else's ladder still means someone else owns the ladder. The architect once listened to a manager explain, with real pride in his voice, that he had not taken a proper vacation in 6 years because the company needed him. That manager did not own a single share of what he was protecting. He was guarding somebody else's kingdom and calling it loyalty. The architect filed the conversation away as a warning, not an example. Working hard is not the trap. Working hard for the wrong ladder is the trap, and it is dressed up cleverly enough that most people never notice they are standing on it until they are too far up to climb back down and start over somewhere else. The physical difference between the two lives shows up in small, easy-to-miss places. The man on the normal path drags himself out of bed to the sound of a snooze button hit 3 times, showers on autopilot, and spends the drive in rehearsing complaints about a job he will repeat again tomorrow. The architect wakes without an alarm some mornings, not because the work is easy, but because the body has stopped fighting the purpose behind getting up. One man's exhaustion comes from doing the same unrewarding motion on a loop for years. The other man's exhaustion comes from pushing against a wall that is slowly, almost imperceptibly starting to give way. Both men are tired by the end of the day. Only one of them is tired in a direction that is actually going somewhere. Nobody warns a man that the moment he starts changing, the people closest to him will start pulling in the opposite direction. It rarely comes as a direct attack. It comes in smaller currency, a comment dropped at dinner, a joke that lands a little too hard, an invitation extended with a raised eyebrow attached to it. Somebody says he works too much. Somebody else says money is not everything, usually right after asking to borrow some. An old friend calls him boring for turning down a Tuesday night out, then calls him obsessed for turning down the Friday night that followed it. None of it is said with real malice, most of the time. It is said because his effort has become a mirror, and the people around him do not always like what they see reflected back when they hold it up next to their own week. The architect hears these comments and files them under a simple word: friction. Every one of them costs him something: an hour of his evening, a piece of his focus, a small tax on the energy he needs for the work still sitting open on his desk. He starts to notice a pattern. The people who show up loudest with concern about his hours are rarely the people who show up quietly with help. They want the version of him that used to be free on a Wednesday. They are not hostile. They are simply comfortable. And his discomfort makes them nervous, because it raises a question about their own choices that they would rather not sit with. So he begins the slow, uncomfortable work of triage. Not everyone gets cut. That would be dishonest and unnecessary, and anyone who has actually built something knows a man cannot do it entirely alone. What gets cut is the noise, the recurring plans that exist only out of habit, the group chat that produces nothing but complaints, the relationships that take without ever once asking what he is building or why. He starts saying no to things he used to say yes to automatically. He stops explaining himself every time. Explaining a boundary to someone who was never going to respect it in the first place is a second tax on top of the first. The first real test of this usually comes from somewhere close to home. A phone rings on a Sunday afternoon, and it is his mother asking, in the careful tone parents use when they are trying not to sound hurt, why he missed the birthday dinner again. He sits with the phone against his ear and a spreadsheet still open on the screen in front of him, and there is a genuine ache in his chest that has nothing to do with the plan he is behind on. He is not made of stone. He hears the disappointment under her voice, and it lands somewhere real. He does not pretend the guilt is not there. He simply decides in that moment that the guilt is a price on the invoice, not a reason to close the business. The apartment gets quiet in a way it never used to be. The group chats slow down and then stop pinging altogether. The weekend invitations taper off after the 4th or 5th decline because most people only act so many times before they stop bothering. There are nights, plenty of them, where he sits alone with the bowl of something reheated, hears a group of friends laughing outside his window on their way to somewhere he was not invited to anymore, and feels the specific, hollow ache that comes from choosing a harder road on purpose. This is the part the highlight reels never show. Isolation does not feel like discipline in the moment. It feels like being left out of your own life. He sits with that feeling instead of running from it. He does not fill the silence with a group chat he does not respect just to feel less alone. He lets the apartment stay quiet because in that quiet is the only space he has left to actually think. Ideas that used to get talked to death in a crowded bar before they even had a chance to form now get room to grow undisturbed. Problems that used to get half solved between rounds of drinks now get worked through start to finish at a desk with nobody interrupting. The silence he used to run from starts to feel less like a punishment and more like a tool he finally learned how to use. This is not a blanket instruction to burn every relationship down to the ground. A man who ends up completely alone at the top of anything has usually made a mistake somewhere along the way, not achieved a goal. The point is not 0 people. The point is fewer, better ones. The handful who ask how the work is going and actually want to know the answer, who show up when it counts instead of only when it is convenient, who do not treat ambition like a personality flaw. Everyone else gets moved to the outer ring, not out of cruelty, but out of arithmetic. There are only so many hours, and every hour spent maintaining a relationship that gives nothing back is an hour stolen from the one thing that might actually change his circumstances. By the time the dust settles, the phone rings less. The group chats are shorter, but the ones still standing mean something. And in the space that used to be filled with obligation, something new has taken root. The kind of undistracted focus that a full social calendar never once allowed room for. The cord gets cut carefully, not carelessly, but it gets cut. There is a strange side effect to all of this that nobody warns a man about beforehand. The fewer people he keeps close, the more clearly he starts to see who was actually worth keeping. A friend from years back, one who never once asked what the architect was building or why, shows up unannounced one evening with 2 coffees and no agenda, just sits across the table in silence while the work continues, content simply to be present without needing anything from the moment. That kind of company costs nothing and gives everything, and the architect learns to recognize the difference between a person who drains a room and a person who simply occupies it without asking for a thing in return. The ones who pass that test earn a permanent seat. Everyone else gets the door, politely but firmly, and without an apology attached to it. There is one dinner in particular he remembers clearly, months into the isolation, sitting across from his father in a diner booth under fluorescent light. His father did not ask him to explain himself, did not lecture him about balance, did not repeat any of the lines the architect had already heard a dozen times from other people. He simply asked one question, was any of it working? And then went quiet and waited for an honest answer instead of a rehearsed one. The architect sat with the question longer than he expected to. He did not have proof yet. Not really. Nothing he could point to and call a win. But he said yes anyway, because for the first time in a long while, he actually believed it. His father nodded once, paid for the coffee, and never brought it up again. That kind of silence, the kind that trusts a man to find his own way through something without needing constant reassurance, turned out to be worth more than every word of encouragement he had cut out of his life to get there. Normal people are taught to fear obsession the way they are taught to fear fire. Spend 14 hours on the same problem and someone will suggest a hobby. Talk about the same goal 3 days in a row and someone will suggest therapy, not because they are wrong to care, but because the culture has decided that intensity is automatically a symptom. And yet look closely at anyone who has ever actually built something that outlasted them, dominated a field, or changed the shape of an industry, and the same pattern shows up every time. A man who could not put the problem down even when everyone around him begged him to. The architect does not fight this pull. He points it. Somewhere close to midnight, at a desk lit by one lamp, he is still working a problem that broke 4 hours earlier. The whiteboard behind him is covered in half-erased arrows and numbers that do not add up yet. A marker runs dry in his hand and he does not notice until it squeaks uselessly against the board. His 6th cup of coffee has gone cold beside a laptop with 11 tabs open, each one a different attempt at the same answer. His eyes burn. His shoulders have locked into a permanent hunch. And still, he does not close the laptop because somewhere underneath the exhaustion is a version of the answer trying to surface, and he has learned that walking away now means losing the thread completely by morning. When something breaks, and something always breaks, he does not spiral into self-pity or reach for a distraction to numb the sting of it. He sits with the failure the way a mechanic sits with a dead engine, taking it apart piece by piece until he finds the exact bolt that snapped. A failed product launch is not a verdict on his worth. It is a data point. A campaign that loses money is not proof he should quit. It is information he did not have yesterday. He has trained himself to feel the sting of failure and process it in the same motion, refusing to let the emotion of the loss slow down the extraction of the lesson buried inside it. This kind of focus asks for a version of discipline that scares off most people before they even attempt it. It means an alarm set for 4:30 in the morning, going off in a dark room while the rest of the block is still asleep. It means sitting up, feeling the pull to fall straight back into the pillow, and getting up anyway. Cold water on the face. A short walk to the desk in the dark, the only light in the apartment the low blue glow of a monitor booting up. No music yet. Just the hum of the fridge in the next room and the quiet click of the keyboard as the first lines of the day get written before the sun has even considered rising. It means staring at a problem that refuses to resolve, feeling the eyes go dry and the focus start to fray, and refusing to look away simply because the hour is late or early or inconvenient. There is no backup plan running quietly in the background either. A plan B is functionally a plan to fail at plan A a little more comfortably. The architect does not keep one lying around as a safety net because a net changes how a man moves. Anyone can tell the difference between someone climbing with a net underneath and someone climbing without one. The second climber checks every hold twice, moves with total intention, and does not waste a single motion on anything that will not get him higher. When the option to fall back to something safe simply does not exist, the brain reorganizes itself around a different question. It stops asking how to get by and starts asking how to survive, and survival produces a level of output that comfort never will. This obsession is not romantic and nobody should pretend otherwise. It costs sleep. It costs the easy pleasures other people take for granted. A lazy morning, a spontaneous trip, an evening with nothing on the schedule. It narrows the world down to a single point and holds it there for months, sometimes years, at a stretch. But the architect has made peace with the exchange rate. He is not trading his life away for nothing. He is trading the parts of it that felt comfortable for the parts of it he actually wants. And he has decided the trade is worth making, wide awake, with his eyes open. long before anyone else on the street has finished their first coffee. There is a particular hour, somewhere close to 3 in the morning, that separates the men who talk about obsession from the men who actually live inside it. The apartment is silent except for the low electrical hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The body has long since stopped asking politely for rest and started demanding it, a heavy, dragging fatigue that settles behind the eyes and pulls at the base of the skull. The temptation to call it a night is not weak in this hour. It is loud, physical, insistent. The architect has learned to recognize this exact feeling as the exact point where most people fold, and he has trained himself to treat the discomfort as a signal that he is close to something, not a signal to stop. He splashes water on his face in a dark bathroom, looks at his own reflection for a second longer than necessary, and walks back to the desk. Nothing about that walk feels heroic in the moment. It only looks that way from the outside years later, once the outcome has finally justified it. Every so often, the obsession pays out in a way that makes the whole stretch feel briefly, almost violently worth it. A number that refused to move for weeks finally shifts. A piece of code that broke a dozen different ways finally runs clean on the first try. In that instant, sitting alone in a quiet room at an hour nobody else is awake to witness, there is a jolt of something close to joy, sharp, private, and entirely his own, because no one else was there to see the version of him that earned it. He does not call anyone to share the moment. There is nobody left on the other end of that particular kind of phone call, and he has stopped minding. He sits with it alone for a minute, lets it pass through him, and then goes back to the next problem, because the obsession does not know how to stop just because one small victory landed. Everyone wants applause before they have done anything to earn it. A gym membership gets purchased and the key tag gets photographed before a single rep has been lifted. A domain gets registered, and by the afternoon there is a headline on a profile claiming the title of founder. People are desperate to be seen as the person who is about to do something because the announcement itself feels like a finish line. It is not. It is quicksand dressed up as a starting gun. There is a reason for this trap, and it lives in simple brain chemistry. The moment a plan gets said out loud to an audience that reacts with approval, the brain releases a small hit of reward, the same kind of reward it would give for actually finishing the thing. The goal has not been touched yet, but the nervous system does not know that. It already got paid, and once it has been paid, the hunger that was supposed to drive the actual work quietly leaks out through the announcement, one compliment at a time, until there is nothing left to fuel the harder part that comes after the applause fades. The architect learned this the expensive way, and now he moves through the early stages of anything in total silence. He does not post the daily countdown. He does not narrate the process to an audience before there is a finished product worth showing them. When an idea takes shape, it stays in a private notebook, not a public caption. He has come to see every word spoken about an unfinished plan as energy leaking out of a system that needed all of it to survive. Nobody builds a weapon by inviting the opposition in to inspect the blueprints halfway through construction. The doors stay shut. The lights outside stay off. The work happens in a room nobody else has access to. There is a particular kind of discipline required to sit on a finished draft of a social post, cursor hovering over publish, and close the laptop instead. To watch a competitor announce a smaller, half-formed version of a similar idea and say nothing, offer no comment, correct no one, defend nothing. To let a stranger in a comment section assume the whole thing has already failed and feel the urge to correct them rise up, and let it pass without a single reply. Every one of those silences is a small act of restraint that most people are simply not built for because it goes against a very old, very human need to be believed before being proven. By staying quiet, the architect protects the one thing that actually matters: uninterrupted focus. Nobody can talk him out of an idea they do not know exists. Nobody can quietly copy a strategy they were never shown. Nobody can plant a seed of doubt in a conversation that never happened. He lets the silence do a second job as well. It makes him easy to underestimate. People assume quiet means inactive. They assume no updates means no progress. They move on, stop watching, stop wondering, and by the time any of them think of him again, he is already several steps further down the road than the last place they checked. This is the part that separates patience from paralysis. A predator in open country does not announce the hunt. It does not circle loudly or draw attention to its intentions. It lowers itself into the grass, goes still, and waits for the exact right moment to move. One clean motion, over almost as fast as it started, and by the time anything else in the field reacts, it is already finished. The architect studies that kind of patience and tries to build it into his own habits. He delays the applause on purpose. He starves the part of his ego that wants credit today because he has learned that ego, fed too early, gets lazy and stops producing. When the work is finally ready, the product launched, the numbers proven, the thing built and standing on its own, he does not need to explain a single step of how it happened. The result carries its own argument. Nobody has to be convinced of something they can already see working in front of them. The silence that felt at times like it was costing him relevance turns out to have been the exact thing building it. He did not disappear. He was simply working somewhere nobody thought to look, and by the time they did, the board had already changed shape without their permission. There is a specific kind of test that comes with this silence, and it shows up more often than anyone expects. A competitor launches something loud, something half-built and heavily marketed, and the online noise around it swells for a week before quietly dying down. The architect watches this happen from the sidelines, says nothing, posts nothing, comments on nothing. Some part of him wants to point out the flaws he can already see in the rushed version sitting in front of him. He resists it every time. Correcting a competitor in public does not build anything of his own. It only proves he was paying attention, which is information he has no interest in handing out for free. He closes the tab, goes back to his own screen, and lets the noise pass by like weather. The hardest version of this discipline shows up when the silence starts to cost him something socially. An old classmate doing well by every visible measure posts a public update about a launch, tagging a group of mutual friends who all comment their congratulations underneath it. The architect sees his own name absent from that comment section, notices the absence, and feels a small, petty pull to say something just to remind everyone he still exists. He does not give in to it. He closes the app instead, sets the phone face down on the desk, and returns to the work still open in front of him. Being forgotten for a season is not the same as being irrelevant. It is simply the tax on choosing to build somewhere nobody is currently looking. Movies lie about what hard work actually looks like. A character decides to change, a fast song plays behind a short sequence of effort, and 3 minutes of screen time. Later, he is standing on a stage, holding a trophy. The version everyone consumes skips the part that actually matters. The long, flat stretch in the middle where nothing visibly moves, where the effort keeps going in and the results refuse to come out, sometimes for months at a stretch. That stretch is where almost everyone who ever quit. And it is also, without exception, where the real work gets done. There will be entire weeks where the architect gives everything he has and the outside world shows him nothing for it. He uploads something that took 11 hours to make, and by morning it has 43 views. Most of them probably his own refreshes at 2 in the morning, checking a number that refuses to climb. He builds a product he genuinely believes in, opens the dashboard the next day, and finds a flat line where sales were supposed to be. He sends out a batch of emails, carefully worded, personally addressed, sent at the hour. Research says gets the best response, and watches the inbox sit untouched for 4 straight days, the little envelope icon never once lighting up. This is the filter. This exact stretch of silence is where the field thins itself out, where people who tried it for 6 weeks decide it does not work and go looking for something easier. The physical reality of this stretch is unglamorous in a way nobody warns anyone about. It is the specific dull ache in the wrists after 4 hours of typing, the way the knuckles stiffen up around hour 3 and have to be shaken out under the desk. It is staring at a spreadsheet until the rows of numbers blur together and stop meaning anything, until a 5 and an 8 start to look identical and a formula has to be checked 3 times, just to be sure it says what it is supposed to say. It is finding a broken link buried inside a 100-page document at 11 at night, tracing it back through 6 other files to find the one small typo responsible, fixing it and feeling nothing close to triumph. Just the tired relief of one fewer thing left broken. The architect has come to understand something most people never get the chance to learn because they quit before they reach it. Results do not arrive on the same schedule as the effort that produces them. A seed planted in the ground does not sprout the moment it touches soil. It sits in complete darkness for a stretch of time that feels, to anyone watching from above, like nothing whatsoever is happening. But underneath the surface, root systems are spreading out in every direction, drawing in whatever they can find, building the exact structure that will eventually be strong enough to hold up everything planted on top of it later. Dig the seed up to check on its progress and the whole thing dies before it ever had the chance to prove itself. The only option is to trust the part of the process that cannot be seen. So the architect keeps showing up to the same desk at the same hour for the same unglamorous tasks, on the days when the bank account is thin and the motivation has gone completely quiet. There is no music playing behind this part. There is no trophy at the end of the scene. There is a chair, a screen, and a task that has to get done regardless of how it feels to do it. On the worst of these days, some small, tired voice suggests it might be easier to just stop, to close the laptop, admit the timing was wrong, go back to something simpler and safer. He has heard that voice plenty of times. He recognizes it now, and he has learned that it tends to show up loudest exactly when the work is closest to turning a corner, not furthest from it. This is the actual war, and it was never against a competitor or a market or bad luck. It is against the part of his own mind that wants comfort more than it wants the outcome. Every discipline anyone will ever need in life gets built or fails to get built in exactly this kind of stretch, the boring middle, far from the applause where nobody is watching and the only witness to the effort is the man putting it in. The architect does not win this war by being smarter than everyone else in it. He wins it on the days he wins it. by simply being the one still sitting in the chair after everyone else has gone home. There is no dramatic turning point that marks the end of this stretch, no single Tuesday where everything suddenly clicks. It ends the way it started, quietly, almost without notice. One afternoon, an email actually gets answered. It is a small one, barely 2 sentences, mildly interested, easy to overlook. The architect reads it twice, feels a flicker of something close to relief, and then closes the laptop and goes back to the same routine the next morning as if nothing had changed at all, because nothing has. Not yet. That is the discipline nobody talks about. The refusal to treat one small win as proof the grind is finally over, and the refusal to treat one small loss as proof it never will be. The chair does not care how yesterday went, it only cares whether he shows up again today. He remembers one launch in particular. Months of preparation collapsed into a single morning that fell almost completely flat. The countdown hit 0, the page went live, and by lunchtime the total number of sales sat at a number low enough to read at a glance without needing a calculator. He sat with that number for a long moment, feeling the specific heavy disappointment that comes from watching months of effort produce almost nothing measurable. He allowed himself exactly 1 hour to feel it fully. No longer than that, because more than an hour starts to curdle into something closer to self-pity. Then he opened a blank document, listed out everything that had gone wrong without a single excuse attached to any line, and began rebuilding it that same afternoon. The grind does not reward the man who feels the least pain. It rewards the man who limits how long the pain gets to run the show. Eventually, if the work holds and the timing lines up, the systems click into place and the thing that was built in private starts to stand on its own in public. The bank account reflects it. The freedom is no longer theoretical. It is a real, usable thing. The kind that lets a man walk away from a room without asking anyone's permission first. Every hour that used to belong to somebody else now belongs to him. This is the summit the entire climb was supposedly aimed at. And when the architect finally reaches it and looks around, he notices something the brochures never once mentioned. It is quiet up there, quieter than expected. There is no crowd waiting at the top to celebrate the years it took to arrive. The people still standing at the bottom of the mountain look up, and mostly what they see is the result, stripped of all the context that produced it. They do not see the 4:30 alarms or the cold coffee or the birthday dinners missed. They see a number, a title, a life that looks easier than the one they are still living. And the easiest thing in the world is to explain that gap with a story that cost them nothing. He got lucky. He had an advantage. He knew somebody. It was different for him. It is rarely said with real cruelty. It is said because the alternative explanation requires them to ask a much harder question about their own choices, and most people would rather not. Nobody at the bottom saw the actual price. They did not see him sitting in a dark apartment listening to laughter drift up from the street below, wondering if any of it was worth the isolation. They did not see the friendships that thinned out to nothing over the course of 2 quiet years, or the specific ache of a phone that used to ring every weekend and eventually stopped. They did not see the nights that felt heavier than exhaustion, the ones where doubt sat in his chest like a stone and refused to move, and the only way through them was simply to survive until morning and try again. None of that made it into the number they are looking at now. The number is clean. The years behind it were not. The architect does not resent them for not seeing it. He never built this for an audience in the first place, and he is not owed their understanding just because the outcome finally became visible. He does not need the applause he refused to chase in the quiet years, and he is not going to start needing it now that it is finally on offer. He looks out at a life he built by refusing to follow the instructions everyone else was handed at birth, and he understands, clearly and without flinching, exactly what it cost to get here. Comfort, certainly. Long stretches of peace, without question. Relationships that might have survived under a lighter schedule and did not survive this one. A version of himself that might have been softer, easier to be around, less exhausted at the end of most days. The price was not small. Nobody should pretend otherwise, and the architect never does. But the price bought something real. It bought a kind of ownership over his own time that almost nobody in the traffic he used to sit in will ever get to feel. The ability to wake up on a random Tuesday and answer to no one but the plan he set for himself. It bought the specific, quiet confidence of a man who has already survived the worst version of the story and came out the other side of it still standing. It bought mastery. The kind that cannot be rented, borrowed, or faked. The kind that only shows up after enough hours have been paid into it, that it stops being a skill and starts being simply who a person is. Standing at the top of it now, looking back down at the years it took to climb, the architect does not soften the story for anyone listening. He does not pretend it was easier than it was, and he does not pretend the cost has been forgotten. He simply accepts that the invoice was fair, that greatness was never going to be sold at a discount, and that he would sign the same bill again without a second thought if the years were somehow handed back to him to do over. The dark, in the end, was not a punishment. It was the price of admission, and he paid it in full. If a younger version of him showed up now, asking what it actually takes, he would not hand over a slogan. He would not tell him it gets easier, because in most of the ways that matter, it does not. The stakes simply get larger, and the mistakes more expensive. He would tell him the truth plainly, that the empty room is not a waiting room before the real life starts. It is the real life, and the sooner a man makes peace with the silence instead of running from it, the sooner the silence starts working for him instead of against him. He would tell him the crowd at the bottom of the mountain was never going to understand and was never required to. He would tell him to build the thing anyway, alone if he has to, in the dark if he has to, for exactly as long as it takes, because the invoice always comes due, one way or another, and the only real choice a man gets is which version of himself is left standing when it does. Some nights, even now, he sits alone in a room that is quieter and larger than the one he started in, and the old habits do not fully leave him. He still checks the numbers before he checks anything else. He still wakes early out of instinct rather than necessity. But there is a different quality to the silence now. It used to sound like absence, like everyone had left and taken something with them. Now it sounds like ownership. Nobody is coming to interrupt because nobody needs to. The room belongs to him completely, in every sense that matters. And for a man who spent years earning exactly that, the silence is no longer something to survive. It is simply, finally, home.